Okay, Chair, you're live on YouTube whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone to this virtual meeting of the Corporate Affairs and Audit Committee. I'm going to remind all participants that normal rules of procedure apply. For example, comments and questions need to be directed through the chair. As we're meeting virtually, proceedings may take slightly longer, so your patience is appreciated. As per our virtual meeting procedures, if questions have been received prior to the meeting, I'll call on the relevant member at the appropriate time to raise that question. If you're invited to speak, please state your name and be as specific as possible about the issue to which you're speaking. And while members of the public can view the meeting via YouTube Live, they will not be actively able to participate or comment on proceedings. As this meeting is being live streamed, can I remind all participants that their conduct should reflect this. I'd just like to welcome Councillor Branson as a guest at today's meeting, and I'll start with apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillor Morstan, a member of the committee, and Councillor Coop as an invited guest. Are there any further, Sue?
No further apologies, thanks, Chair.
That's great. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the Corporate Affairs and Audit Committee meeting from the 26th of November. There was one action on there, which was to write to the chair of the Tees Valley Combined Authority, OSB, with regards to the funding arrangements for Boho 10. That's been done and should receive a response shortly. Councillor Rooney, I see you're indicating.
Just an amendment, Chair, on the declarations of interest in the minutes. I'm down as declaring an interest as a former director of the MDC. I'm also a member of Teesside Pension Fund, which wasn't reflected.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other amendments? Okay, I'll take the silence as good. Are those minutes agreed and moved?
Great.
Thank you, Councillor Rooney. Thanks, Councillor Hubbard. Okay, so I'll move on to agenda item 4 for this. I'd like to hand over to Claire Walker. It's the procurement policies, practices and financial regulations compliance.
Hi, thank you, Chair. My name's Claire Walker and I'm the Specialist Commissioning and Procurement Senior Manager in the Commissioning and Procurement team, and I'm just here to present an annual report, so I'll just run through it. So obviously the purpose of the report is just to provide you with an overview of the procurement activity that's happened over the last financial year. The report is necessary just to have an oversight of the Council's corporate governance arrangements. So the first section covers compliance with standing orders. Excuse me. So obviously we have the contract procedure rules in place and the Council's constitution providing the routes that we go to market when we're procuring goods and services. The table in section 4 just provides the current standing financial threshold, that we work in compliance with. There was actually approval to reduce the lower threshold from the 15,999 down to 10,000, but due to COVID and other issues, that hasn't yet been implemented. So I'm just looking to formalise that change on the 1st of January 2021 with the intended outcome that we're going to be able to offer more contract opportunities to local suppliers, as well as obviously further challenging value for money. The next section just covers our practice updates. So obviously we've got a target that we measure for local commissioning. So on the balance scorecard, we provide quarterly information just around the spend that's happened with our local market. And as you can see, from April 19 to March 20, we only managed to achieve over the 40% in one quarter. However, that 40% target did increase from 25% in the previous year. So obviously, whilst we haven't actually managed to hit the 40%, I still think it's a good achievement in us hitting sort of the high 30s. I've just tried to provide some information just around the monetary terms that obviously that equates to. So, you know, collectively within the Tees Valley, that was like just over 24 million, which was a slight increase on the previous year. And obviously of that, there was 14.2 million spent directly with Middlesbrough-based suppliers. Obviously, that strategic objective remains for us into 2021, with the target remaining at the 40%. Obviously, during COVID, obviously Buy Borough campaign sort of morphed slightly and is picked up and driven by the corporate team, regeneration and marketing team, which I think was being a real positive, trying to engage and see more local businesses supported during these times. So moving into 2021, one of the aims that I've got is obviously to work closer with regeneration and marketing, just to see if we can further promote and publish local opportunities, both through the procurement, but also obviously for those businesses that we wouldn't necessarily procure, but that we can do some work with local residents just around supporting local businesses. Monitoring of standing orders. So as part of the process within the team, we do look at spends through our Business World finance system, and we try and identify if there's any issues or any concerns where maybe standing orders hasn't been followed. So obviously we look at non-compliant spend, and then we work with the service areas just to promote obviously our team, but also the availability of procurement routes, the frameworks, the different opportunities that they've got. Obviously, like I say, you know, COVID's had an impact on everything, so we'll just be continuing to look at that and obviously strengthening that work as we move forward. Purchasing cards, obviously 400 cards at the moment, which is a considerable reduction because I believe the previous financial year we had about just over 500. Spend continues to be high volume, low risk areas, with a total of 8.6 million going through the cards, which would have been the equivalent of processing sort of just over 33,000 invoices. Obviously, we are currently looking at a new opportunity through an EPO contract with a company called Oxygen, just around an early payment scheme. So we're currently working together with finance and other colleagues just to look at that project. It's around early payment opportunities for suppliers, so increasing cash flow, but it utilises and links into our Business World function, so it would actually see a move away from purchasing cards, but more of a strengthened and enhanced process through our current business, our current finance system, but we're just currently working up the business case, and that will be flowing through obviously governance arrangements and sign off, but that's an exciting piece of work that I'm really looking forward to taking forward next year. Exemptions from standing orders. So as you know, within the Constitution, there are certain circumstances where exemptions can be requested. During 1920, we actually approved 62, which was actually only a minimal increase compared to the previous year where we had 60. I've just tried to provide a bit of a breakdown around the number of exemptions for each service area, and obviously just to give you a flavour of why those exemptions were approved. So it was mainly around technical specification requirements or person-centred care, or where we had evidenced value for money. During 1920, there have actually been 55 contracts awarded, which were the outcome of 34 quotation processes and 21 tenders. Currently, at the time of writing this report, we had 394 contracts contained on our contracts register, which is obviously fully available to the public. So, and that's just the overview, really. Obviously, you know, we're just looking for you to note and acknowledge the governance arrangements and the activity of the procurement team. And just if there's any questions.
Do any members have any questions on this report? Okay, I've not seen anybody indicate. Okay, so can the committee note that report? I'm seeing lots of nodding heads, so that's great. Thank you very much for that, Claire.
Thank you.
Cheers. I'll move on to agenda item 5, which is the internal audit progress report. And for this, I'll hand over to Phil Jeffrey from Veritel.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So this is our latest regular progress report on delivery of the annual audit plan. So the cover report starts in 16 of your pack, paragraph 6, there onwards sets out our current position. It just highlights that we're continuing to work remotely, which has worked reasonably well, although we are finding some delays in contacting people. I think we're continuing to improve how we use our video conferencing. Each member of the team now, for example, is set up with direct phones connected to their equipment at home, and we've got a mechanism to feed any delays in audits up to Ian and Justin. The covering report also mentions some of the areas of focus of our current work. So some of this has been on the key financial systems, which weren't completed last year. So we've got 2 appendices. Appendix 1 from page 18 onwards, that lists the audits ongoing. So there's a few different classifications there. For example, specification issued is where we've agreed the scope with the service area and the work is ongoing. We've got some where we've got field work complete. So that's where the bulk of the work has been completed. And we're currently in the stage of writing the report and the review stage of the audit. You'll also see that there's some work planned for later in the year. Now, some of these may change depending on other priorities and our continuous assessment of risk. So there may still be some other audits added in before the year ends. You'll also see that some of the work is now complete. And then Appendix 2 from page 23 onwards, that gives you some details about the work that we've completed. There's a summary of the work there and any issues identified. You'll see that all of the work so far is around grant claims, which is why there is no opinion given. So what we've done there is just done some work to confirm that the expenditure was spent appropriately and in line with the grant conditions. So generally there we haven't identified any issues. There was some improvement we've identified in relation to subcontracting controls on the MCLS work, just to make sure they're in line with the council's procurement practices. So that gives you an overview of what we've been doing. If there's any comments or questions on that, I'm happy to take them.
Do any members have any questions? Ian, I've noticed you've put your hand up. You want to come in on this, so I'll let you fire away.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add that further to requests made by this committee previously, Phil has supplied me with a complete list of the audits completed since the last election. So a list of the audits that were done, a quick description, and the overall opinion, which I'll arrange to be circulated to the whole committee. So you've got an overview of what has been done going back to May last year. So that'll be coming around the end of this week.
Thanks for that, Ian. So are there any further comments or questions from members of the committee? Okay. On that point, Ian, I'd just like to make it clear to the committee that if there are any items within that list that you'd like to look at in more detail, if you let myself and Ian know, we'll arrange for them to be brought forward to the next meeting for further scrutiny as such. Okay, well, thank you for that. And Phil, it's back with you for agenda item 6, the counter fraud policy update.
Yeah, this is my colleague Jonathan Dodsworth. You're on mute, Jonathan.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
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 Apologies. Good afternoon. As part of our ongoing counter fraud work, we've been reviewing relevant policies at the council. And 2 of those policies were the whistleblowing policy and the anti-money laundering policy. And we found that on review that they were out of date and they needed to be urgently updated because they contained reporting lines and personnel that were out of date. So as well as an inactive telephone number for staff to call if they had a whistleblowing concern. So we've updated those to reflect the current arrangements, and I putting these policies in front of the committee today. We plan to publicize the whistleblowing policy in the new year. But I'm happy to take any questions about either of these policies or this report.
Do any members have any questions or comments with regards to these reports? Okay, I'm not noticing any hands going up. One point I did raise at the pre-meet was with regards to the whistleblowing policy. At the moment, it's just been a case of formalities, numbers and names and information in that respect updating. I would like to see that the policy actually receives a bit more officer engagement from junior level, see what they would like to see included in the policy to bring it more up to date. Do any members have anything else they wish to add, or are they happy to note that?
Chair, Councillor Higgins wishes to speak.
Councillor Higgins.
Yeah. It's just that that piece of that what we've just been talking about, I think the staff lower down as well, not just management.
No, I agree.
They should have a copy so they know what to do if they see something wrong.
I actually, that was one of the things I pointed out. It needs to be at the ground level, where officers where officers are engaged and actively engaged to see what would improve the whistleblowing policy, because they always tend to be those documents that those you would expect to engage with are scared of. So it would be helpful to make it more user friendly. So I take it you're agreeing to that as well, then, Councillor Higgins.
Yes, Chair, and thank you.
Brilliant. As there's been no dissent, and I've asked if everybody's happy to note that and acknowledge the bits that have asked to be looked at, I'll move on to agenda item 7, and that's the update with regards to legal services and the response to the Ofsted inspection of children's services. And for this, it's Anne-Marie Wilson presenting the report. I'll hand over to you, Anne-Marie. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Wilson. I'm the Head of Service for Legal for People. I've been recently appointed into that post, so I was the principal that's referred to throughout the report when reading the briefing note. The purpose of this briefing was just to provide an update to the committee, giving an update on the legal services response to the Ofsted inspection, and it follows a report that was brought to this committee in March, which outlined the things that legal were going to do in order to try and improve some of the issues that were raised within the Ofsted report in respect of legal and also in assistance with supporting children's services. I don't intend to go through the report in full. I hope you've all had the opportunity to read it, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I did want to just bring out a couple of things, including an update in relation to the recruitment. I think it's set out within the report that recruitment is an issue that we've had within legal services, particularly for people for the children's, who look after the children's area of legal, that we have had difficulties in recruiting solicitors, legal execs and barristers to that post. We've had an advert out since July for one of our vacant posts, and on Friday we interviewed 2 people for that post, both of whom were appointable, and on that basis we're seeking to appoint those people to roles within legal. One of them is the substantive post that I'd held previously, which has just obviously become vacant with me moving into this role. So it creates 2 vacant posts that are currently covered by agency workers. Both of those potential candidates have been spoken to and indicated that they wish to take up those positions, which I think is really positive, given that we've struggled really for probably 2 years trying to recruit into this post. So I think that's going to make a massive difference in terms of stability across the department, and also in relation to reducing our spend on agency workers. It'll also allow us the capacity, hopefully, to be able to look at some of the issues that we identified in the original report and that we've updated on the progress within this report. And I think one of the key things that I've highlighted throughout the report really is about the communication across our department, our relationship with children's services and with the partner agencies. And I think that's something that I hope it's evidenced in the report, that that's something that we've made a lot of progress on within the last 6 months, particularly on the backdrop of doing this with COVID and a new learning, a way of working for everybody. But we are pleased within the department about the progress that we have made within that. And as I say, particularly with this area of recruitment, hopefully that can only progress us further forward. I'm happy to take any questions on the briefing note if anybody does have any questions that they wish to raise.
Do any members have any questions they wish to raise or comments? Okay, nobody's indicating. I'd like to thank you for that report, Anne-Marie. One thing I would like to say is, whilst I don't expect you to keep coming back exhaustively on the same issue, it would be good if we did get updates every 6 to 12 months for the time being to see how we're progressing, because obviously recruitment's a difficult area and we don't want to be falling backwards into the same trap. And it might be that the briefing note and the information provided to this committee could result in another committee scrutinising a piece of work that would be beneficial and help the authority actually take on board new staff and retain staff, etc.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And I think as part of this recruitment process, certainly the feedback that we've had in relation to the changes that we made and the way that we've adapted that process to try and improve our recruitment, the feedback's been really positive. And I think that that's a credit to HR for the alternative ways really that they've come up with advertising the post and getting Middlesbrough Council and legal services in particular to a wider audience. So I certainly think that that's something that could assist other areas as well across the authority, and that has been fed back to HR.
Thanks.
I'm happy to come back.
Brilliant. So is everybody happy to note that report? Again, I'm not seeing any dissent. Everybody looks happy. You can tell Christmas is coming. Thank you very much so far to Phil, Anne-Marie, Claire for the presentations of the reports, and Jonathan. I am aware people are disappearing and dropping out, going to other meetings as we proceed. And on that basis, I'd like to move on to agenda item 8. Now, this is probably the one that's going to generate the most interest. It's the Tees Transporter Bridge. Members will have received a report previously, earlier on, or rather last week, which was a confidential, and that was the actual whistleblowing report, which formed part of the background papers after discussions with Charlotte and Ian. That's now a public document and will appear on the council website, because I think it's important that members of the public and other elected members understand the issue fully. With regards to this, I will take points both about the whistleblowing report and about the next steps. And I would like members to bear in mind that whilst there will be concerns that they've got following the reading and understanding of the whistleblowing report, that it's our job and our duty to also look at the next steps and how we can implement things to prevent these failings happening again. So on that basis, I'd like to hand over to Ian and Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to start off and then Ian will present the bulk of the material in the slides. So members of the committee will be aware that next week the Council's executive are due to discuss the Transporter Bridge, including its repair needs and its future. Today, though, we're inviting this committee to consider lessons learned from the Transporter Bridge scenario and their wider application to the management and maintenance of the Council's assets. The lessons learned emerged from an internal audit report just referenced there by the Chair. That was an investigation report that was triggered by a whistleblowing concern. The starting point in respect of a whistleblowing investigation is it would usually not be made public in the interest of the whistleblower and their anonymity. That, of course, has to be weighed against the public interest in the information emerging from the investigation. And I think it's reasonable and fair to say that now we're in a position clearly where there is a public interest in discussing the investigation, its findings, and lessons learned in this forum. So I'll hand over to Ian now to talk in more detail about this.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say a couple of things at the start about whistleblowing and our whistleblowing policy. So obviously the updated policy has been earlier on the agenda today and presented by Jonathan. And I want to say how important whistleblowing is to the council's governance arrangements and how Charlotte and myself take that seriously. And I agree with the point Charlotte's made about the balance of confidentiality and public interest, and I would like to reassure anybody who's thinking that they have issues they want to raise that we will respect their confidentiality. And as part of bringing this forward today, I don't know who the whistleblower is, but through internal audit, we've been consulting with the whistleblower and making sure they're comfortable with the process. So nobody watching this or thinking about these sort of issues needs to fear for their confidentiality. I would like to thank the whistleblower for raising the concerns, because I think as we go through this, we'll see that there's some really important things come out of this, and it's shown a lot of value. And I would also like to thank the internal audit team who worked on this, who I think have picked up a big, difficult and bespoke issue and did a very good job of turning that into an audit report and bringing out the lessons which we need to consider today and think about what we're going to do going forward. So I just want to say that before we started. In terms of the background to this, obviously we're all familiar with the Transporter Bridge. It's a Grade 2 listed structure that opened in 1911. Middlesbrough Council manages the bridge in line with an agreement with Stockton Council. So we share the costs, but we lead on the management of this particular bridge. And the bridge has been closed since August 2019 to allow for essential investigation and maintenance works. A whistleblowing report regarding the health and safety and overall maintenance regime for the Transporter Bridge was received by the Council's then internal auditor on the 8th of August 2019. So the whistleblower got in touch with internal audit, which was TVAS then, Tees Valley Audit and Assurance Services, on the 8th of August. In response, an audit investigation was agreed with the then Director of Finance and Governance Support, James Bromley, and the Executive Director of Growth and Place, Kevin Parks, at the time. That commenced on the 28th of August, and the final report was completed on the 23rd of December 2019. Part of that was to look at the scope, and the scoping of the audit was to go back 10 years from the date of the whistleblowing report, because of the nature of the allegations and because of the nature of the structure. It was deemed that 10 years was the appropriate period to go back and try and look at what was done. In summary, the allegations made by the whistleblower were that the bridge was in a dangerous state of repair due to repeated requests for essential maintenance being refused. There was a lack of management oversight and a refusal for the bridge to be closed so that maintenance could be undertaken. Wheels, ropes and anchor points on the bridge were substantially out of date. Cross members on the bridge were loose and some had fallen into the river. Maintenance staff training was out of date. No routine management meetings had taken place. I'll end over the next few points outline TVAS's findings around that and the overall improvement planning for the bridge. So the first thing that an auditor has to do when they're looking at this is to define what they would expect to see in terms of the arrangements for looking after the bridge. So what internal audit did was look at it and come out with 3 key points to turn to during this presentation. So firstly, did the council understand the requirements, what was needed to maintain the bridge? Did they have an understanding of the starting point? Secondly, did they ensure that the necessary expertise was in place to apply those requirements and be able to maintain the bridge properly? And thirdly, did they undertake the work to understand what the situation the bridge was in and what needed to be done to it? And very importantly, keep appropriate records of the outcomes and make evidence-based maintenance decisions on what needed to be done. That evidence base is really important, and we come back to something that auditors will always come back to, and it's an audit trail. If we as an organisation cannot evidence that things have been done, then we've got to assume that they haven't, especially with key assets and things of this nature. And when an internal audit are making the comments, which I'm going to go through now, what they tend to be saying is there was not an audit trail, there was not an evidence base that things had been done. And I think it's fair to say, whilst I'll go through it in some detail now, that those 3 key requirements weren't met. And that's obviously a very serious thing. So Audit found that the overall audit was a cause for considerable concern. So that's the most serious findings that internal audit could come to in relation to the areas examined. By this, they meant that fundamental failures existed within the control environment and the council was exposed to unacceptable levels of risk. They concluded that most of the allegations made by the whistleblower were accurate. While no evidence was found that repeated requests for maintenance or requests for the bridge to be closed were refused, they did identify a mostly passive and ineffective management approach to the transport of bridge over the previous decade, the 10-year score. It found that the lack of specifically qualified or trained bridge or structural engineering staff engaged by the council to manage the facility ultimately led to the deterioration of the structure to the extent that it presented a health and safety risk, and that there was a lack of adequate maintenance programs or appropriate inspection regimes in place to meet health and safety regulations and best practice. While some inspections had been carried out, there was not evidence to support that any of the recommended actions formed the basis of any management reports. There was limited evidence of management reporting and was difficult to establish senior management's role or level of oversight. There was no evidence of reporting to wider stakeholders, including Stockton Borough Council. 10 findings were set out by TVAS in the actual report, which members of the committee will have. 7 of those findings were priority 1, that is a fundamental risk requiring immediate action, and 3 were priority 2, a significant risk requiring timely action. To put that into some context, across all of the 70 plus internal audits in the financial years 2017-18 and 2018-19, there were only 3 priority 1 findings across the whole of those 70 other audits, and there were 7 in this one. As such, this was a more serious report received by the council from its internal auditor for many years. TVAS noted some improvements to working practices since the recent transfer of bridge management from transport and infrastructure to property and commercial services, and have also noted cooperation from the newer management in implementing their findings. So there is a positive feedback there. Since the audit investigation, property and commercial services have been taking forward works to allow the agreed management actions to be completed and to propose options for the safe reopening of the bridge and its future operating model. And that's the executive report which will be considered next Tuesday that the Monitoring Officer referred to. I then want to go through the agreed management actions and their priority. The target date for completion of all actions has moved from the 31st of March 2020 to the 31st of March 2021, with the agreement of the Council's current internal auditors, Veritel, to account for the time taken to conduct, analyse and report structural investigations, and the fact that that process has been interrupted by COVID-19. During this period, the health and safety risks outlined in the report have been mitigated by the continued closure of the bridge and temporary works to ensure its structural integrity. So management actions. There was an action that management should ensure that maintenance and staff meetings at the transported bridge are regularly held and minuted. All identified actions should be recorded and followed up to ensure that the remedial action is delivered by action owners within the agreed timescales. That's a priority 2 action and goes back to that point about records and evidence keeping. Second recommendation was that senior staff from both transport and infrastructure and property and commercial services should meet regularly to ensure that relevant matters are discussed and minuted, e.g. maintenance or inspection programs and day-to-day issues relating to the bridge. All identified actions should be recorded and followed up to ensure that remedial action is delivered by action owners within the agreed timescales. Again, evidence and record keeping. That was a priority 2 action. Management should review the effectiveness of the current management arrangements for the transport bridge. Going forward, the council should consider external technical consultancy or guidance to ensure that both the service and the structure remain fit for purpose. That's a priority 1 action, and that speaks to ensuring that we have the correct expertise in place, either internal or external, to look after the bridges. Management should ensure that effective governance arrangements are implemented for the transported bridge. This should include performance being regularly reported to all stakeholders, and a service level agreement agreed between the Council and Stockton Borough Council, which details all management responsibilities to ensure that the facility remains fit for purpose. That was priority 1, and again speaks to the theme of evidence and record keeping. There must be compliance with the requirements of the lifting operations and lifting equipment regulations. An immediate review should be undertaken so that all lifting equipment can be identified and correctly categorised. That's a priority 1 action, and again that speaks to understanding the requirements for keeping the bridge in the correct situation. Appropriate training must be provided so that personnel have the competency to carry out user checks on harnesses. A documented system of undertaking checks on personal issue harnesses and items in rescue bags should be implemented. Appropriate harness inspections must be performed on a 6-monthly basis, with an appropriately qualified contractor having to satisfy the requirements of the PUA and working at height regulations. That was priority 1, and again speaks to having the necessary expertise in place and recording that we have that. A documented maintenance schedule must be produced by an appropriately qualified in-house employee or external consultant to detail what checks are to be carried out at the transporter bridge and their associated frequency. Documented systems should be adopted whereby individuals sign for checks carried out on a registered job card as soon as they've been completed. A maintenance log should be created to detail all activities that are undertaken by on-site staff as well as outside contractors. That's a priority 1 recommendation, and again speaks to records and evidence and making sure that we've got an audit trail. A training needs analysis should be compiled for all staff at the transporter bridge. This analysis should highlight the training required, differentiating between mandatory training for legislative requirements and other advisable training for best practice. The analysis should identify how and by whom the training will be delivered and the associated frequency. Training records for all staff should be maintained to ensure an up-to-date record of all staff training completed and to be completed is available. That's priority 2, but again speaks to having the necessary expertise and having the evidence base that it's there. Management should ensure that in the interest of safety for members of staff, public, visitors, activity agents, and for the vessels that travel underneath the structure, that the transporter bridge has a full structural survey. All remedial actions identified as a result of that survey must be addressed as directed by the survey findings. The facility should remain closed until it has been deemed fit for purpose by surveyors. Again, that's about having necessary expertise and the evidence base to prove that. That was a priority 1 action. And finally, management should organise a risk workshop with all relevant staff for the purposes of compiling a register that captures all the risks facing the bridge, including health and safety risks, and those relating to the strategic objectives of the transporter bridge, i.e. risks that could prevent the attainment of the Council's vision and aims. The risk register should then be periodically reviewed, at least twice a year, to ensure that the risks remain relevant and that planned mitigation actions are implemented according to timescales. Keeping records and evidence, and that was a priority 1 finding. So that's the 10 findings that came out of the audit report, which, just to be absolutely clear, are very, very serious and worrying to us as a council and make us ask a series of questions of ourselves. I'm sure members have questions on that. I just want to go through some of the things that have happened afterwards and some of the thoughts that the monitoring officer and myself have, and then I'll hand it back over to you, Chair, if that's okay. So progress made since the audit investigation. Management oversight. Management of the bridge has moved from the then Transport and Infrastructure Service to Property and Commercial Services. That happened around the time of the audit. And as I say, the feedback from our internal auditors is that the new management is cooperating well with implementing those findings. A review was undertaken by the new management team that led to the temporary closure of the bridge in July 2019, and as you will know, it remains closed at this point. Regular operational team meetings were held and documented until the bridge team was temporarily redeployed due to the closure of the bridge. The Memorandum of Understanding with Stockton Borough Council has been reviewed, and quarterly joint meetings are being held to review arrangements for both the Transporter Bridge and Newport Bridge. So Newport Bridge is maintained by Stockton Council, but on the same 50-50 arrangement, so we're the other partner on Newport Bridge. On policies, procedures and associated works, a full structural survey of the bridge by competent persons has been concluded, with a number of repairs made to make the structure safe and park the gondola. All lifting equipment has been repaired where appropriate and passed relevant safety inspections. New harnesses have been purchased, all relevant staff have been trained, and a 6-monthly inspection programme has been implemented. A weekly visual inspection will be completed as an interim measure to assure structural safety until remedial works have been agreed following an analysis of the structural survey. Once the future direction of the bridge has been agreed, a detailed risk register, forward plan of maintenance checks and staff training, and associated monitoring and reporting will be implemented as per TVAS's recommendations. A report will be presented, as said, to the Executive on the 22nd of December 2020, outlining options for the future operating model for the bridge and associated capital and running costs. That's the place to consider the position of the bridge, investment required, etc. Obviously, and as members will be aware, I'm fairly new in post as the Director of Finance and the Section 151 officer, and this is an audit report that I've inherited, and in my career, this is one of the most striking audit reports I've seen. And the first thing that is important to me when looking at it is that we don't simply look at this in the context of the Transporter Bridge, as the Chair said earlier. We look at this in the context of wider governance considerations for the rest of the Council's assets that it owns. Control failures such as those highlighted in the investigation do call into question the robustness of the system for assessing the condition of buildings and structures and planning and implementing appropriate works for the rest of the Council's estate. It's therefore proposed that what I would ask the committee to do is approve a review of current arrangements within the Council to provide assurance that the situation in respect to the Transporter Bridge is unique and that other such instances will not occur in the future. I believe that improvements to the Council's health and safety policy and procedures and reported to the Health and Safety Committee and the Health and Safety Manager presented a detail that was considered by the Health and Safety Ad Hoc Scrutiny Panel on the 3rd of November 2020. We need to make sure that those are working and that we continue to get an annual assurance report from the Health and Safety Manager that comes to this committee. We could start that in February 2021, but I think that should continue because of the importance of what's going on. So the next steps that I would request would be that this month, straight away, we commence a review of arrangements to assess conditions of Middlesbrough Council buildings and structures and plan and implement the appropriate works with the purpose of providing assurance that government's arrangements are robust. We report to Executive on the required works and the future operating model for the bridge, which, as we know, is going next Tuesday. That the completion of actions identified in the TVAS audit investigations should be complete by March 2021, and that we should commission Veritao to review the arrangements in respect of the Transporter Bridge 6 months after that date, so that we would ask them to do a specific piece of work on the Transporter Bridge following up in September 2021. And that's the presentation that I have. I'll hand that back over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I know members are going to have comments and questions on this. So I'll take them now if you'd just like to indicate with your hands. I'll start with members of the committee first. I'll take them in order that I see them. Councillor Hubbard, I've noted yourself, Councillor Branson. I'll bring you in at the appropriate point.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got a number of questions, so I'll ask maybe one or two, Chair, and then you can come back to me if you wish.
Okay. It's
been a total unacceptable state of affairs. Lives have been put at risk, as Mr. Wright has indicated, and I think we as a panel and as a council should thank the whistleblower for having the courage to report such an issue. It's not an easy thing to do. I don't know if it was a member of staff or public, but I think we should be sending out our thanks to whoever done that. We've been on this issue before, Chair, haven't we? No audit trail. It seems It happens all the time with this council. We found it over the assets, and now we're finding it with this. Could I ask Mr. Wright, what's the value of the asset in the council's accounts of the Transporter Bridge? And in the statement of accounts, has anything been marked under the financial risk of the transporter? Thanks, Chair.
Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know off the top of my head what the value of the Transporter Bridge is in the statement of accounts. I can get that answer and circulate it to the committee. That's fine. That'll be a useful thing. We are taking into account, because the executive report is coming next week, about potential costs in maintaining and getting the bridge to be safe and operational. So that's been taken into account in the medium-term financial plan and the work that we're doing there. You'll find, if you look at the quarterly monitoring finance reports that have been coming since the bridge has been closed, we have also been recording that savings proposals associated with the bridge have not been achieved because of the closure. So that's where we're at on those points. But I will get the information on the asset value in the statement of accounts of the bridge and circulate to the committee.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
On that point, Ian, the report that's going to the executive, would it not take into consideration the asset value and the actual cost options for maintaining offset against it? And because there's two options essentially being put forward to the executive. One is keep it closed and it's going to cost X million of pounds. One is reopen it, it's going to cost X million of pounds. But without actually having the value and the executive not being aware of that, it makes it difficult for them to put it into context, I suppose, as to which one's the most worthwhile and most viable option.
Yeah, I understand that, Chair. I think what I would say is, actually, you might not expect me to say this, but the book value that we have on the balance sheet in the statement of accounts for the Transporter Bridge doesn't really reflect its value to the town. It doesn't reflect sentimental value. It doesn't reflect the PR value. And to be honest, it'll be getting very close to being reflected in the accounts as a liability because it costs more to operate than it does bring in terms of income, etc., etc. Now, therefore, I think the consideration for executive is much wider than that, and it's not really a question because what I assume is completely off the table is we don't intend to sell it, so that technical book valuation isn't particularly relevant to decision-making process.
Okay, I appreciate your answer. I just know that we've took it into account previously on other assets where we've got a liability to maintain them, whether we've subcontracted them out like MEMA and things like that. So I thought it would be a fundamental part of the report. So I just thought it was worth asking. Do any other members have any comments or questions with regards to this? Councillor Rooney, and then I'll go to Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chair. Just one around the structural survey. How far has that gone? I'm not an engineer, so I don't understand these things in any great detail. But the survey, is it just to look as if the bridge is safe, or is it in more detail to look at what maintenance and what repairs are needed? And how long is it going to take? When will it be completed? And when can we expect to see the reports from it? Thanks.
Take that, Chair?
Yeah, certainly, Ian.
So my understanding, obviously I'm not an engineer either, but my understanding is that a full structural survey has been undertaken that both looks at the current situation, but also forward casts for the next 10 years about what will be needed to be done to keep the bridge in working order over the next 10 years. So it's a very comprehensive survey. My understanding is that the work has been done and that the final report will be received tomorrow. Now, the service tell me that they've had interim reports and draft reports, but the final report is expected to them tomorrow. And I've already had a request from the Vice Chair of this committee, Councillor Hubbard, about that report. Now, I'm told that it's more than 500 pages long, which was so the service is looking at making sure in the first instance there's a summary available to members, and then they'll be able to talk them through more detail of it. So the Director of Environment and his service is going to make that available.
Thanks, Ian. Can I just do a quick follow-up on that? Will that also estimate the costs associated with putting it right as well? Will there be a monetary value put into that, which kind of leads on from what Brian was saying earlier on?
Yes, there will, and the early indications of that are reflected in the executive report, which is going next week.
Sorry, with your permission, Chair, is it likely that the we've seen a figure bandied about around about 7 million. Is it likely that that figure is going to be substantially higher?
That's the only figure I'm aware of at the minute, which is the one that's in the report. So as far as I'm aware, that's accurate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chair. I have a few, if you'll indulge me. I'd first of all like to agree with Councillor Hubbard. I think that there is almost an emerging culture in this council of officers not informing elected members of important things. We've seen it with Children's Services, and now we're seeing it with the Transport Bridge. So my first question, I don't know if you can answer this, Ian, is who was informed that the bridge was in such a dangerous state of repair before the whistleblowing report?
I can't answer that. I can only speak to what was in the whistleblowing report and the fact that in terms of the evidence base, the internal auditors weren't able to find that any reporting had gone up the management chain before that, which the internal audit found as a failing in itself because the bridge clearly was in that state, but they didn't find that anyone had been told and not passed that on.
So the bridge was in a poor state of repair and nobody informed anyone. It just was.
No, I didn't say that it was nobody informed anyone. I said that internal audit weren't able to find the evidence that that happened. So I can't give you an answer on who knew.
Okay. The GMB informed the council on the 18th of July that they would like to invoke the whistleblowing policy. You attempted to meet with the trade union on the 31st of July, and you didn't close the bridge until the auditors informed you that they've received the whistleblowing complaint. Is it normal to not to close the bridge until the auditors get in touch with you?
I'd first just like to say that if they are the whistleblowers, Councillor, that's the first I've known of that. I haven't asked who the whistleblowers were, and just on the grounds of wanting to try and help protect confidentiality. But if that's who it was, then it is. I don't know what the normal procedures would be in that basis. I presume that we wouldn't shut a transport route until we were satisfied that the situation was serious enough that on the balance of risk it needed to happen. So I assume what happened in the interim time there, as I say, I don't know, was that we established that there was enough substance in the allegations to require the bridge to be shut.
Who is responsible for the change programme, please?
In terms of the overall responsibility at the time or now, Councillor?
At the time.
I believe, and I'm speaking off the top of my head slightly, but I believe that will be the Chief Executive, who had overall responsibility for the change programme.
Thank you. So the staff were informed in late 2018 that a review has taken place and savings of £40,000 needed to be found from the change programme. What I suppose this might be a question for the Chief Exec, but what evidence was there that the savings could be found from the bridge? And then that was subsequently changed to £80,000 of savings. What sort of regard was given for health and safety and bridge maintenance when that was made?
Obviously, I've got significant experience of working on the change programme, so I would know how that process worked, which would be that when savings are requested, they will be put forward by the management of the service. So that saving would have come forward from the Transport and Infrastructure Service. The questions would have been asked about whether that could be delivered safely, and indeed, as always when we're looking at savings, whether it could be delivered at all. So I would imagine that that was a bottom-up process. We don't start off by at the top saying we're looking for £80,000 from the Transporter Bridge. That's not how our savings processes work.
Thank you. So potentially the manager at the time identified that. Who was the manager at the time?
The manager for Transport and Infrastructure at the time, I can get you that answer and circulate it. I've got the name for that for you.
Great, thank you. That's all, Chair, thank you.
Chair, thank you. Do any other members wish to speak on this subject? Councillor Higgins, and then I'm conscious that Councillor Branson's been waiting extremely patiently. So I'll hand over to you first, Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to agree with the councillor who said we should thank Whistleblower. I mean, it did the council a great service and the people of Middlesbrough. And I also agree that the cost of the transporter in itself is not as important as how the people of Middlesbrough feel about it. People from all over the world come to see that. And, you know, we need to spend the money to get it up and running again, because you can't put a price. It's the transporter is built in us. It's us. So, you know, I can't emphasize that enough. Please don't just say, well, it's worth this much, so it's going to cost too much to mend it. Okay, thank you. And sorry, can I just also say, sorry, the health and safety inspection, was it done in-house or did somebody else come in? Because we've got an excellent health and safety officer. Does anybody know?
There was initial health and safety work done by our health and safety team, but a lot of the expert structural work, and the vast majority of the structural work, was done by somebody external, because obviously it's specialist to the bridge. And clearly this bridge is a very specialist bridge as well. It's not it's not run of the mill.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Branson.
Right. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for inviting me to the committee. For those of you who don't know, I'm Chair of the Health and Safety Committee and have been the last year, and we have expressed our concerns about the issue with the Transporter Bridge on a number of occasions, eventually at the last meeting asking for the responsible person to come before the committee at our next meeting to explain what was happening. So this is of concern to us. Particularly, that comes out of the report are three main issues. First of all, we don't have anybody who's qualified or appears to be qualified that's in charge of the Transporter Bridge. It certainly doesn't seem to be so from the report. The other thing is that there's been clear breaches of the law in respect of the failure to carry out any of the inspections required under LOLA of the lifting equipment or a general or principal inspection. But what really concerned us as a committee was the failure of the safety management system, which this whole incident brings up. It appears to us either there were no inspections of the bridge, or if there were inspections, they weren't reported back to management, or alternatively, they were reported back to management and management decided to do nothing about it. It certainly did not bring any of the concerns up to the Health and Safety Committee. A particular concern to us was the fact that in 2018, we had a serious near miss in which a person working there was nearly killed by a falling part of the bridge. Had there been a fatality there, we would have been investigated by the Health and Safety Committee, and we would certainly have been prosecuted. And that would have reflected very badly on the council. And yet, although I've been a member of the Health and Safety Committee since I became a councillor in 2016, I do not remember any reference made to a near-miss incident on the Transporter Bridge. And an incident of this magnitude is something that the Health and Safety Committee most certainly should have been aware of. So my main concern here is that we need to make sure that the health and safety management system is effective. It clearly isn't at the moment. Now, I know that my colleague John Armstrong's working hard on this, and I remember, as you said, that he reported back to the Scrutiny Committee on this issue on the 3rd of November. There are clear things that we need to have, not just for the Transporter Bridge, but for all areas of health and safety within the Council. First of all, it's essential that John, as a health and safety manager, has a direct means of communication with the top of the Council, and that means the Mayor, via whoever is acting on his behalf. I believe he has a direct connection with Charlotte Benjamin on this, if I'm right. That's important because there is always a danger of a conflict of interest with another member of the senior management team who may have an interest in ignoring health and safety issues. And we've seen that as the case here. I think it's absolutely essential that we have a proper reporting system and that the report shows what actions need to be taken and that there is evidence that these actions are taken. Now, I understand that has been put in place by the drawing up of the risk register, and that's very important. I think the most important thing is that we see that this information is available, made available ultimately to the Health and Safety Committee if there's a serious issue, and not hidden from us. My main concern, main reason for wanting to come here is to express the fact that I don't think that happened over the last few months, and obviously I'm very worried that it might not be happening in other areas unless we sort this problem out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Branson. I don't believe you require a response from an officer on that one, do you? You've just made your points.
I think the only thing is that I would like to make sure that the Health and Safety Committee are able to look into this matter and then to report back on.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Hubbard, did you have any further questions? Because I know you said you had a few. Did you fire them all off?
No, everything was covered. Thanks, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does any other member wish to comment? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody indicating.
Sorry, Chair. Would it be the best to send this to the Health and Safety Committee so they can keep a check on what's happening? I think that should have been one of the recommendations. I would like that to be.
I think from the report, there's a number of recommendations. I see that officers have put some actions forward, but I think members of this committee probably have additional actions and pieces of work they'd like to see, because one thing that's been a damning indictment is the fact that pretty much every member on this committee has highlighted the lack of record keeping and lack of member information available to members, and it's now becoming an embedded culture to a large extent. So I think something needs to be done there. In addition to that, I think it's quite clear that all of these management reviews, change programs that are meant to save the council thousands upon thousands, we must be on our fourth or fifth model of that now, and I don't think we've ever seen a saving. And in fact, this has probably highlighted that rather than create a saving, it's now created a massive financial burden, and it did put people at risk. Whichever way we dress it up, it caused problems. And I think Audit need to be looking at the management reviews, the senior management reviews, and see if we've actually realised any savings, or were they just lip service, and to what extent it's had a detrimental impact on the authority, because it must be at least every 12 months we find something, whether it's children's services, and again, that's due to changes, management reviews, structural changes. We're now on to the Transporter Bridge. What is the lurking in the cupboard that we don't know of? And I think that's where we need to be looking. And quite rightly, Ian's pointed out the actual assets that we have, ranging from highways and so on, and the general overall policy on management of those needs looking at. But I think we need something that encompasses everything, because the biggest and most damning indictment for us as an authority is the fact that the whistleblowers didn't have the confidence to go to directly to the senior management of the authority or the political leadership, and had to go to the auditors. And that is, I suppose it harks back to the whistleblowing policy. We've acknowledged some amendments today, and we've ticked the boxes in regards of updating phone numbers, addresses and contacts, but is it really putting people off engaging with it? Do they not have any confidence? I mean, one thing's clear from today: the whistleblowers definitely deserve a huge thanks, because I think the opportunity we've got today, looking at the actual report, and now the confidentiality being lifted on it, actually sends out a signal to other officers and members of staff that you report a serious concern, we will look at it. Whereas in the past, confidentialities had to be protected. We can't maintain anonymity to this extent. They don't wish to be disclosed. So whistleblowing reports are looked at and considered behind closed doors. And I think if it wasn't for their, I suppose, resolve, we wouldn't actually be sat around the table talking about this so openly, and other officers and members of staff that have concerns wouldn't actually know we deal with them, and wouldn't be aware. They'll just hear about policy changes. But I think moving forward, I do agree with the next steps Ian's proposed, but I would like to see something more in there, because I think it's almost every committee we come across a report or we come across a scenario where members are raising concerns that they're not being informed of decisions, they're not being informed of service changes, policy changes, and it seems to become less of a member-led authority and more of an officer-directed. And we need to step back from that and say enough's enough. And I think the change programme and the continuous restructures have had a detrimental impact with regards to member involvement. And obviously political changes don't help. Putting politics to one side, I mean, we're always going to get battles politically, but it would be nice to see that change. I think it is changing slightly more. I think this is one of the best committees for cooperation with each other. So it does show it works. And I would like that to be reflected across the council, and members should take that on board. But actually, we need to now use the opportunity to say members have had enough of being kept in the dark and these problems popping up, because we're not actually seeing any benefit. We're not seeing any changes. Yes, action was taken eventually, but at what point did members, even from the executive down, become informed of the problems? It begs a lot of questions, but I think we really need to review the whole change programme, management structure, how they keep changing it, because it's having a negative impact on various service areas all of the time. So I would like to propose that Veritel look at the management reviews, the change programme. Has it realised any savings? Because I think it's clear it's had a detrimental impact in this scenario, and it's always the go-to excuse when there's other problems, such as children's services, or there was a management change, a management structure review. So I think it would be good to include that. I also would definitely like to drive home the whistleblowing policy improvements and officer engagement at ground level, rather than just fluffing around the edges and speaking to senior management, because they're less likely to be the ones that are engaging with it, because senior officers have greater protection than those on the ground, or that's how it's perceived. And I would definitely like to see a lot of more involvement from the Health and Safety Committee. I think there's a lot of elements of this whistleblowing report, and now it's public and it's widely available to members should they request it. I think it will see fundamental work being sent out to various committees, because no doubt Environment and Infrastructure will want to look at it as well, scrutiny. It may lead to other pieces of work. So on that note, Ian, how will we incorporate a piece of work in addition, looking at the management reviews? Have they realised any of the savings that we've been promised over the years? Even if we just roll it back over the last 5 years. I mean, short time to have been a councillor, but I've probably seen more reviews than I have years as a councillor. And have they realised the savings and what impacts it had? Because realistically, it doesn't matter what savings we've been promised, the cost of the Transporter Bridge alone is significantly greater than any saving we've been promised if you add them all together. And I think it's also having a detrimental effect on members being kept informed, and it's probably not conducive to good working relationships in so much as it's enabling some officers to decide what members need to know and when they should know. I'm not speaking from our our working relationship, by the way, because I think we're quite open and transparent, but I would like that adding. I think it's vital that that's added.
Chair, I don't think it's any issue to ask internal audit to look at management reviews. If you want to specify that to 5 years, then that makes sense. It's quite easy to look at what savings were proposed and whether they've been delivered or not in terms of the other context. I'm saying that I won't be doing the work myself, but I think that's a clear question that can be answered. We'll have to think about how we apply that to what we think potential negative impacts of having those reviews have been, because that's harder to measure, but we'll see what we can do around that.
Well, we say it's harder to measure, but as members, I think we can measure it pretty well, because with most changes and reviews, you tend to find the information either improves within the directorate or deteriorates even further, in so much as how we're kept informed. But not only that, it's where the problems arise, isn't it? Which service area under the review impacts the authority.
And I'm not disagreeing with you at all, Chair. I'm just thinking it's qualitative rather than quantitative, so it's a bit more challenging to measure, but we can look at how we can do it.
Brilliant.
That's no problem. And certainly, as we've already discussed, we will be looking at revamping the whistleblowing policy more substantially, with a wider range of views consulted, not just from staff, but from other potential stakeholders, just to reassure ourselves that that is as user-friendly as possible.
And with regards to the Health and Safety Committee's involvement going forward, I think it's key. It's key to as the whole wider picture, not just relating to the transporter. How can we improve that?
That's a little bit outside of my remit, Chair. I agree that the work of the Health and Safety Committee is key to our governance processes around this, and I would hope that they can request to look into issues that they feel are important, just like this committee can around more narrow governance stuff. But I'd be outside my area of expertise if I started making promises now, because I don't really, that's not my committee.
Charlotte, do you have any idea? Is it something you want to contemplate?
I think it's something that I can take away, Chair. The question that I've got is whether there needs to be an ongoing dialogue, I suppose, between the Health and Safety Committee and this committee in respect of any issues that the Health and Safety Committee pick up. I can see that Councillor Branson.
Yeah, I mean, I can see Councillor Branson wants to come in. I do think that it would be valuable if there was a dialogue between this committee and the Health and Safety anyway, because of the governance side of things and the wider issues. Councillor Branson, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As I said right at the beginning, or right at the end of what I said, that I think it's important that this issue is referred to the Health and Safety Committee. Well, it might be a good idea if we meet together as a joint committee, if there's a possibility for that to do within the rules of the council. But there certainly is the case that the Health and Safety Committee needs to investigate the extent to which the safety management system we've got now is robust. I know there have been changes, but we need to see that those changes actually have worked. So however that can be arranged, you're more knowledgeable than I am on this. I leave to yourself, but I certainly think we need to be involved.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Yeah, Charlotte, I mean, I believe it sort of crosses both committees' terms of reference. So I think it's probably one of them that needs a bit more reflection and determining how's best, whether the Health and Safety Committee go away, look at implications, then bring it back to this committee, or whether it requires joint involvement. I don't know, but are you happy, Councillor Branson, and is everybody else on this committee happy if Charlotte works that one out, because it's a grey area, one that we probably wouldn't find ourselves in traditionally.
I think Councillor Higgins wants to come in, Chair.
Yeah, I've seen Councillor Higgins' hand. Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. With everything that's been said, I think one of the things that I'm passionate about is that councillors have to have the can't think of the word, the confidence that what we get told in committee meetings is everything, that we get told everything, and then we can decide how things are going to go. It hasn't happened like that. It hasn't. As you said, Chair, yourself, about the children's services, we were dropped right in it because we kept getting told everything was hunky-dory and it wasn't. So I think that's something that all councillors will be grateful for. That the officers, I mean, the officers here, I mean, Ian tells you everything, good or bad, and some of the officers do, but there's quite a few that don't, and all they're doing is saving their own backs. So, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, on that basis, yeah, I would like. I know you want to come in, Ian, but I would like to thank you because you've done pretty well considering you've turned up without a tin hat on such a contentious issue and an emotive subject. You wanted to come in on that point.
Just as I say, I'm not aware of the technicalities and the terms of reference of the dividing line between this committee and the Health and Safety Committee. We'll look into the detail of that, myself and Charlotte. But I certainly think that the review that's one of the actions about the arrangements to assess the conditions of buildings and structures and plan and implement appropriate works that will come out of this is relevant to be reported to both committees in whatever way we can make that work. So, you know, I'm more than happy to make that commitment today because I think it's appropriate.
I mean, on the additional point that I asked for with regards to the management reviews, you said it's relatively easy in the change programme. Can we set a date for getting that turned around and information? Because if it's relatively easy, would March 2021 be difficult? Or would that be a fair time frame if the committee approves it?
I think what I said was that the savings were relatively easy,
yeah,
and the wider implications were a bit more complicated. But I'm happy to commit to the end of March 2021 at this point in time. If something comes up and we can't deliver that, I'll come back to you, Chair, and talk about it.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any other points that they would like to look at, include other than the actions that Ian's already proposed? Because it's our duty as a committee to make sure that process and governance is on the ball, and I don't want to miss the opportunity. I know we can call it back at any opportunity and add something to the list, but I think while it's a hot topic, I think we should utilise it. Councillor Wright?
Chair, I don't know if this is I don't know how we do this, so I suppose I defer to your better judgment. But how do we get to the bottom of this culture that appears in Middlesbrough Council of officers withholding information and elected members finding out when it becomes a disaster? How is it we can get round or I suppose improve the cultural practice in management and leadership of the council, where that isn't the case, where we can have an honest conversation from the start rather than at the end of the process when it's all gone wrong?
In all honesty, we are meant to have measures and practices in place to protect us from that happening. In the Constitution, the access to information. So if they're not giving us it, we can go looking for it. But I tend to agree, it doesn't really work. Charlotte, are we at a point where essentially it's like minding toddlers and we're going to have to look at a process or policy for governance that would actually ensure members there's a structure in place and it's being followed so members get information? I mean, it seems a bit school teacherish, but I think to give good governance, is it not something we should be looking at? Because yeah, it seems to be our Christmas wish list. Something goes wrong. Children's Services last December, that came out. Transport Bridge this December. It's almost like it's almost coincidental that these problems come out and are highlighted, and then we find out about them at possibly the quietest time where Joe Public's least interested in what happens in a local council, because they're not interested at the best of times. They see it as a talking shop. But would it be something we would be able to look at to bring in or consider the options with regards to policy? Because I know we can't see everything, commercially sensitive, exemptions, but I think it is getting to the point, and it has got to the point where members need almost an insurance policy, so that when things go wrong, we can turn to it and say, well, this was in place, it didn't happen. Why is that person still here? It needs to be asked to an extent. Is there a policy that would improve our governance as an authority that we could look at developing to give us better protection?
Chair, I certainly think it's something we can take away and look into. I think it was raised this committee when Andrew Glover attended from a different perspective, really. And I think it's probably fair to say that when Ian and I have discussions about information sharing, we both operate from that position of transparency first, and then if we've got sensitive information, we consider, exemptions. But to take a step back from that, I think you're right. It would be useful to have a kind of agreed common approach about communications generally, and happy to take that away to have further discussions about.
Yeah, because I mean, I do remember Andrew Glover coming to the committee and making a presentation, and discussions prior to committee with him, I actually said, is it getting to the point where we need to put a policy in place? Because it seems to be social media find out before members. And we kind of, as a committee, I think we gave officers the benefit of the doubt in that scenario, and enabled communication to be developed. But I actually think it's gone backwards. And putting the political hat on, I had to fight for information before under the previous administration. We've gone more open and transparent, but actually it's equally difficult, if not harder, with less and less members across all political divides being able to access information. So is it something you could bring to the next committee with options of how we could take it forward potentially, Charlotte, by liaising with relevant teams, because the relevant departments, because other authorities don't seem to struggle, but Middlesbrough does. But then the first time there's a problem, members are the first ones to take it in the neck. Yeah, 99% of the time the members don't know about it.
I'm happy to do that, Chair, and just to check my understanding. So from my point of view, there's a question about process and governance here, i.e. when members should be finding out about things, how members should be finding out about things through the decision-making routes. That's one aspect of it. But then there's a wider, I think, communication picture that perhaps needs looking at. Because in this scenario, we're not talking about a decision as such, are we? We're talking about an emergence of a concern about an asset. So that's slightly different than other questions about decisions and when members are consulted and find out about them. Am I on the right lines with that?
Yeah, you are. And I just think with regards to decisions, yes, we agree that there is some degree of finding out after the event. But when it comes to information such as this, let's face it, this is possibly something we would never have found out to the extent had we not had the debate about access to information, the public interest test, and how serious it is. But that has a negative impact because there are a lot of other committees that whistleblowing report is relevant to in order to improve things at the authority. And we were potentially shackling the authority's ability to improve by not providing information to the relevant members or to all members. And I think we need something in place because there are decisions that happen. There are officers making decisions and members are finding out after the event. And it's having those checks and balances in place in order to improve that.
Chair, can I interrupt, please?
You can.
Due it's another meeting and they're telling me to join it. So is there
right?
Is there any votes that are needed? I think we're all in agreement with the.
I'll quickly. I think we can quickly wrap this one up then. The agreement, the proposals that have been put forward by Ian in his presentation and those that have been discussed, does anybody wish to add any further, or can we agree those and Charlotte bring something back with regards to the communications and information for members? Okay, there's no dissent.
Great.
Everybody's nodding and happy. That's great. So on that basis, yeah, I'll bring this meeting to a close. There are no other urgent items apart from I'd just like to announce Teresa's in a rush for her next meeting. It must be more important. I'd like to thank officers for their attendance and the presentation of the report. Definitely.
Thank you, Chair. Merry Christmas to everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Bye. I'd like to thank the whistleblower again. It can't be said enough. If Ian, you could relay that on behalf of the committee through the report's author, that would be great. Because if it wasn't for them, we would be in a worse position than we are now.
Absolutely, Chair.
We'd still be trundling along. And again, thanks to yourself and Charlotte for taking inheriting the worst report we've had. Yeah, and hopefully we can come up with some good things as a result of this and see some improvements slowly but surely. But I do think that now that report's public, we should see a lot more members take an interest in it, read it, and it should see some valuable work coming from other committees. And on that basis, I'd say wish you all a safe journey home, but you're already sat there, unfortunately, due to COVID. And wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Chair.
you.
Thanks, Chair.
Cheers.
Merry Christmas.